Most people spend their entire lives chasing happiness. The happiest people you know stopped chasing it, not because they gave up, because they discovered something the Stoics understood 2,000 years ago that most people still miss entirely. Happiness is not a destination. It's a way of moving, and the people who have genuinely found it, not performing it for social media, not convincing themselves they have it, but experiencing it as a stable background condition of their daily life. Don't operate the way you assume. They don't have better circumstances. They don't have easier lives. They don't have more money, more luck, or more of the things culture tells you are the prerequisites for feeling okay about being alive. They do 9 specific things differently, and the differences are invisible from the outside, until you sit with someone long enough to notice that in objectively similar situations, one person consistently seems lighter than the other. Tell me in the comments, do you know someone like this? Someone who just seems genuinely at ease in a way you can't fully explain? What is it about them that's different? Stay with me, because each of the 9 things I'm about to walk you through comes with a specific action you can take today, not someday today. And the last one reframes everything that came before it in a way I didn't expect when I first understood it. Thing 1. They stopped measuring their life against other people's lives. Here's something almost nobody admits out loud. Most of the unhappiness you feel on any given day is not about your life. It's about the gap between your life and someone else's life that you've been shown on a screen. The happiest people you know have, at some point, genuinely stopped caring how their life compares to someone else's. Not as a philosophy they subscribe to, while still feeling the pull every time they open their phone. As an actual, lived reality. Most people believe this happens naturally as you get older or wiser. It doesn't. Comparison is a default setting of the human nervous system. It evolved as a survival mechanism, a way of constantly calibrating your position relative to the people around you so you could respond to threats and opportunities in real time. But we now live in a world that has industrialized comparison on a scale no nervous system was designed for. Social media doesn't just show you what your immediate peer group is doing. It shows you the curated highlight reel of thousands of people simultaneously. All of them, by design, showing only the moments that read as winning. The nervous system that evolved to compare itself to perhaps 100 people in a village is now processing thousands of comparisons per day. The result isn't motivation. It's a chronic, low-grade sense of falling behind that has no resolution. Because no matter how much you achieve, there's always someone in your feed who appears to have achieved more, done it faster, or done it while looking better. Here is what the happiest people understand that most people don't. The comparison was never accurate. You're comparing your full experience of your life. The doubt, the bad days, the private failures, the 3 a.m. uncertainty, to other people's public presentation of their best moments. It was never a fair comparison. And continuing to run it is not a neutral act. It is an act of sustained self-harm so normalized that most people don't even have language for it. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his private journals that's almost jarring in its directness. It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. You care more about what other people think of your life than you care about your own genuine experience of it. I want to give you a specific person, not famous, someone I actually know. She had, by external metrics, a genuinely successful life. Good income, a relationship she valued, an apartment in a city she'd always wanted to live in, and she was quietly miserable in a way she couldn't explain because by every measure she'd been taught to use, she was winning. But every time she opened Instagram, she felt the specific hollow sensation of being slightly behind. Someone from her college had started a company. Someone she used to work with had just bought a house. Someone she barely knew had posted a photo from Japan. She wasn't jealous of any of these things specifically. She was just perpetually aware that other people's lives seemed to be accumulating while hers felt like it was standing still. I asked her what changed. She said, "I deleted the apps. Not as a challenge, permanently. And within 3 weeks, not dramatically, just quietly, the background noise went away. Not because anything in my life changed, because the machine generating the comparison ran out of fuel." The Stoics called what she found ataraxia, a particular kind of tranquility that comes not from having everything you want, but from the cessation of wanting things you were only wanting because someone else seemed to have them. The daily action. Identify one specific comparison you run regularly, a person, an account, a metric, and remove the input that generates it. Not forever, for 30 days. And notice what fills the space. The next thing is one that almost nobody talks about in conversations about happiness, and that the happiest people practice with a discipline that surprises you when you see it up close. Thing 2. They treat their attention as a non-renewable resource and guard it accordingly. Here is something that's true and that most people have not fully absorbed. Your attention will be spent on something today. Every waking hour, it goes somewhere. The question is not whether to spend it. The question is whether you are spending it deliberately, or whether it is being spent for you by systems specifically designed to capture and monetize it. Most people's attention, for most of their waking hours, is being spent for them. The notifications, the scroll, the background noise of media, the conversations that consume mental space long after they've ended, the planning and worrying about things that exist only in the future or the past. All of it is spending the resource, and the resource is finite. This is not a metaphor. Cognitive bandwidth is measurable. Decisions made late in the day, after a day of mental expenditure, are measurably worse than decisions made early. The quality of your thinking, your emotional regulation, your capacity for genuine presence with people you love, all of it degrades as the day goes on. What the happiest people do that most people don't is treat the morning hours of their attention as the most valuable asset they own. Because it is. I know someone who has a rule he's maintained for 11 years. He doesn't consume any external content before noon. No news, no social media, no podcasts, no email before he's done 3 hours of whatever matters most to him that day. When he described this to me, I assumed it was about productivity. It wasn't. He said, "It's about what the morning feels like from the inside." For years, I didn't even know a different feeling was possible. I started every day already inside someone else's framing of reality. I didn't know what I actually thought until I started finding out before anyone told me. The Stoics had a concept they called prosos, attention to the self, not self-obsession. The disciplined practice of staying present to your own experience, your own values, your own actual situation, rather than being perpetually pulled into the noise of the world around you. For Marcus Aurelius, this was a morning practice. He wrote in his meditations every morning, partly as philosophy, mostly as a way of beginning each day from a place of genuine self-possession, of knowing what he thought before the world told him what to think. The daily action. Identify the first thing you reach for in the morning. Your phone, almost certainly. Set a specific time, not all morning, even 30 minutes, during which the phone stays face down and the morning begins inside your own mind. Notice what you think about when nobody is directing your attention. What comes next is the thing that took me the longest to understand, because it sounds passive until you realize it's actually the most active thing on this entire list. Thing 3. They have genuinely accepted what cannot be changed. Completely, not philosophically. Most people believe they have accepted the things they cannot change. They haven't. What they've done is intellectually acknowledged that certain things are outside their control, while continuing to spend emotional energy on them as if the energy might somehow change the outcome. These are not the same thing. Acceptance, in the Stoic sense, is not resignation. It's not giving up. It's not pretending something painful isn't painful. It's the specific act of withdrawing your energy from a situation that exists outside the territory of your actual influence. Completely, not partially. And redirecting that energy to the territory where you can actually do something. The mechanism that keeps people from genuine acceptance is not stupidity. It's a cognitive pattern psychologists call counterfactual thinking, the mind's tendency to generate alternative versions of past events by changing one element. If only I'd said something different. If only I'd acted sooner. If only things had gone another way. This pattern serves a function when you might actually change the outcome next time. It's how you learn from mistakes, but it runs completely out of control in situations that are genuinely finished. Losses that cannot be recovered, relationships that are over, decisions that are irreversible. And in those situations, it doesn't produce learning. It produces prolonged suffering in service of nothing. Here is what genuine acceptance looks like in practice. A woman I know whose business failed, completely, publicly, after 4 years of building something she believed in. The kind of failure that takes money, time, credibility, and leaves you with nothing obvious to show for any of it. For the first 6 months, she processed what most people around her called healthy grief, but what she later recognized as a sophisticated form of non-acceptance. She was still running the counterfactuals, still emotionally engaged with a version of events that no longer existed. The shift happened when she asked herself one question she hadn't thought to ask before. What would change about what's available to me tomorrow if I spent 0 more minutes on this? And the answer was nothing. The business would still be gone. The money would still be gone. The time would still be gone. But she would have today. Epictetus, a freed slave who understood loss in a way that was never theoretical, wrote, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." He wasn't saying, don't have preferences. He was saying, the suffering that comes from fighting reality, from continuing to spend energy on the gap between what happened and what you wanted to happen, is optional. And genuinely happy people have, at some point, stopped paying it. The Stoic term for the complete acceptance is amor fati, love of fate, not tolerance, not resignation. Genuine embrace of reality, including its painful elements as the specific material that is yours to work with. The daily action: identify one thing you are still partially fighting, a loss, a relationship, a decision where the outcome is genuinely fixed. Write one sentence. This happened. It is finished. What is available to me now? Notice whether your energy shifts. The next thing is the opposite of what the happiness industry recommends. And it's the reason most self-improvement efforts don't work. Thing 4. They don't add more good things. They remove the sources of quiet misery. This is the one where most people's approach to happiness breaks down completely. And I want to be direct about it. Most of the happiness industry is organized around addition. Better relationships, more meaningful work, richer experiences, deeper connections, more joy. All of that is real and worth pursuing. But the happiest people you know, if you watch them carefully, are not primarily organized around adding positive experiences. They are organized around removing unnecessary negative ones. Here's why this distinction matters more than it sounds. The human nervous system is wired with a negativity bias that is, by most estimates, roughly 3 to 5 times stronger than its positivity response. A bad experience registers more strongly, lasts longer, and does more damage to your baseline state than a good experience of equivalent intensity does to improve it. This means the path to a better baseline emotional state runs more reliably through the removal of bad inputs than through the addition of good ones. You already understand this for physical pain. You don't try to feel better by adding pleasure when you have a recurring injury. You treat the injury. But people don't apply the same logic to their emotional environment. They tolerate relationships that consistently drain them while adding new positive ones on top. They stay in jobs generating chronic stress while building more enjoyable hobbies. They maintain habits producing low-grade misery. Certain social media, certain conversations, certain obligations carried out of guilt, while trying to layer positive experiences over the existing friction. And then they wonder why the positive additions don't move the baseline. I know a man who spent 3 years trying to be happier. He read everything, tried every practice, added meditation to his morning, exercise to his week, gratitude journaling to his evenings. His baseline barely moved. Then he did something different. He made a list of everything in his life that consistently made him feel slightly worse. Not catastrophically, just slightly, repeatedly, reliably. 3 relationships that left him drained after every interaction. A news subscription he consumed anxiously every morning. A professional obligation maintained out of guilt for 2 years. A habit of checking his phone before bed that disrupted his sleep. He removed all 4 over 6 weeks. When I asked what changed, he said, "Everything the additions were supposed to do, the subtractions actually did. It's like I'd been trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it." Epictetus distinguished between what he called patha, the disturbances we allow to disturb our equilibrium, and eupatheiai, the healthy emotional states that emerge naturally when the disturbances are removed. His point, well-being is not something you construct. It's something that emerges when you stop constructing the obstacles to it. The daily action. Make a list of 5 things in your current life that consistently make you feel slightly worse. Not dramatically, just slightly, repeatedly. Identify one you could remove or significantly reduce in the next week. The next thing is the one where the research and the Stoic philosophy converge so precisely it's almost eerie. Thing 5. They invest deeply in very few relationships instead of broadly in many. The happiest people you know almost always have 1 or 2 relationships of unusual depth. Not many relationships of moderate depth. 1 or 2 of real depth. This runs against the social instinct that broader connection is better. That more people in your life means more support, more love, more belonging. And broad connection has real value. But there is a specific kind of nourishment that only comes from being genuinely known by another person. And that nourishment requires a depth of investment that most people spread too thin to achieve anywhere. Genuine depth in a relationship requires 3 things that most social structures make very difficult. Consistent time, not occasional large investments, but regular small ones. The kind of honesty most people reserve for their private thoughts but rarely bring into actual conversations. And the experience of having been through something together, not necessarily something dramatic, but something real, where both people showed up as they actually were, rather than as they wanted to be perceived. Most people's social lives have a lot of people they're comfortable with and very few, sometimes none, who know the full version of them. The Stoics used a term, oikeiosis, usually translated as belonging, but meaning something more specific. The natural process by which we recognize genuine kinship with others. Genuine connection in the Stoic framework is not about shared experience or common interest. It's about mutual recognition, being seen accurately and accepted. That experience requires depth, and depth cannot be distributed across 20 people. She had a large social life by every external measure. Full calendar. rarely alone. And underneath all of it, quietly lonely in a way she couldn't explain for years. When she finally articulated it, she said something I've thought about many times since. I have lots of people I can call. I don't have anyone who would call me just to find out how I was. The distinction is everything. Having people you can call is comfort. Being someone people call because they specifically want you, because they're curious about the actual texture of your inner life, is belonging. She found that belonging eventually, not by expanding her social circle further, but by contracting it deliberately and investing the freed time into 2 friendships at a depth she'd never attempted before. The daily action. Identify the 1 or 2 relationships in your life with the most potential for genuine depth, and reach out today, not with something meaningful or significant, just with real contact. Ask a real question, make a plan that isn't about efficiency. We're halfway through. What comes next is the one most associated with Stoicism, and the one most people think they understand, but actually practice in the weakest possible version. And after that, at number 7, is the one that will require the most honesty. Stay with me. Thing 6. They do hard things voluntarily and regularly, not for achievement, but for what they become in the process. The happiest people you know almost universally have some practice or commitment in their lives that is regularly difficult. Not accidentally difficult, deliberately so. This seems paradoxical in a conversation about happiness. Why would voluntary hardship produce well-being? The Stoic answer is more sophisticated than it first appears. Seneca practiced what he called melete, voluntary rehearsal of hardship. He would periodically eat very simply, sleep without comfort, dress plainly, not as punishment, as practice. Specifically, as the practice of demonstrating to himself that his well-being was not dependent on external comfort. He wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" The point wasn't that comfort is bad. The point was that dependence on comfort is a source of invisible anxiety. When your well-being requires specific conditions, a certain level of physical ease, a certain amount of recognition, a certain standard of living, you are, in a precise sense, not free. Every potential disruption to those conditions is a potential threat to your emotional state. Voluntary difficulty erodes that dependence incrementally. Each time you do something hard and discover that you can, the range of conditions under which you can remain fundamentally okay expands slightly. Cumulatively, over years, this produces what the Stoics called autarkia, self-sufficiency. The genuine experience of not needing circumstances to be a specific way in order to function. People who have this quality carry themselves differently, less reactive to setbacks, less destabilized by discomfort, less dependent on things going well in order to feel okay, which means that when things don't go well, which they won't repeatedly throughout any human life, they return to baseline faster. Voluntary difficulty, in practice, doesn't have to be extreme. It can be the person who maintains a daily writing practice even when they don't feel like it. The person who has difficult conversations instead of avoiding them. The person who takes on projects that are genuinely uncertain instead of staying within the comfortable range of the already known. What matters is not the specific form. What matters is the regularity of the encounter with chosen difficulty. The daily action. Identify one thing in your life that is regularly difficult and that you have been avoiding. Not for performance reasons, because the avoidance itself is generating a quiet background cost. Do it today, or one small version of it. The next thing is the one that might generate the most discomfort, because it requires the most honesty about a structure most people have never examined. Thing 7. They don't outsource their sense of worth to outcomes. Let me say something directly. Most people's sense of who they are goes up when things go well and down when things go badly. This is not a character flaw. It is the default human configuration. The nervous system responds to social approval and disapproval for good evolutionary reasons. But in a modern world where feedback is constant, abundant, and often completely disconnected from genuine quality, this default configuration creates a specific problem. When your sense of worth responds to external feedback, your emotional stability becomes hostage to events and opinions that are largely outside your control. You work on something for months. It doesn't land the way you hope. And the failure doesn't just register as disappointing. It registers as evidence about your worth as a person. You make a decision that someone criticizes, and the criticism doesn't just register as a perspective to consider. It registers as a potential downward revision of who you are. This makes every outcome feel higher stakes than it is. Not because you're neurotic, because you've built a structure where outcomes carry weight they were never designed to carry. The happiest people have, through experience more than philosophy, interrupted this structure. They care about outcomes. They want things to go well. They invest seriously. But the connection between how something turns out and who they are has been deliberately severed. Marcus Aurelius described this through a concept he returned to throughout his meditations, the distinction between what he called the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the internal director of the self, and everything else. External results, other people's opinions, the success or failure of his plans. He invested in those things. He didn't define himself by them, and he did this daily, not once as an insight, daily as a practice, because the pull toward defining himself by outcomes was daily too. What this produces, practically, is a person who can take risks without paralysis, receive criticism without collapse, experience failure without it destabilizing something essential. I want to give you the most concrete version of this I know. She sent something she'd worked on for months, a project that mattered deeply to her, to the people whose opinion she most valued. The response was not what she hoped, and she told me afterward, "I noticed something. The disappointment was real. I felt it completely. But it didn't reach the place it used to reach. It didn't become a question about whether I should be doing this at all. It was just, that didn't land the way I wanted. What do I do differently?" That gap, between the disappointment and the destabilization, is everything. The daily action. Today, do one thing well for the process of doing it, not for the outcome or the feedback. Complete it. Set it aside. And notice whether you can let its outcome be what it is, without making it mean something about you. The next one surprised me when I first encountered it because it sounds very practical, but turns out to be one of the most psychologically significant things on this entire list. Thing 8. They have a clear sense of what they're building, not just what they're doing. The happiest people you know, even the ones doing very ordinary things, almost always have, underneath the daily activity, a clear sense of direction. Not a 10-year plan, not a life strategy. Something more basic and more powerful than either of those. A sense of what they are building incrementally through the accumulation of their daily choices. Most people have things they're doing, jobs, relationships, commitments, but the doing exists in isolation, one day connected to the next by routine and obligation rather than by any felt sense of direction. What the happiest people have, in addition to what they're doing, is a narrative a story in which today's actions connect to something they care about that exists beyond today. This is not grandiosity. It doesn't require a world historical mission. It can be as specific as, I am building a version of my relationship with my children that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. I am building a body of work, even if only I ever see it, that reflects my genuine curiosity. I'm building the kind of person I want to be at 70. These are not plans, they're orientations, directions that give meaning to the accumulation of ordinary days. The Stoics called this having a telos, that toward which everything points. For them, the telos of a human life was the ongoing development of virtue, arete, not as moral perfection, but as the continuous exercise of the specifically human capacities for reason, courage, justice, and wisdom. A person with a clear telos experiences their days differently from a person without one. The same activities feel different. The same setbacks have different weight. The same ordinary Tuesday has a different quality of meaning. Because every ordinary Tuesday is also a small installment in something that extends beyond Tuesday. I knew a man who worked in logistics, genuinely unremarkable work, who was, by every measure I could observe, one of the happiest people I'd spent extended time with. I asked him about it eventually. He said, I decided about 10 years ago what I was building. It's not a career, it's a way of being a person. I'm building someone who shows up, who does what he said he'd do, who the people in his life can count on. Every day I either make progress on that or I don't. The work is just where it happens. The daily action. Write down, in one sentence, not a paragraph, what you are building. Not what you're doing. What you're building, the thing that your daily actions, viewed from above, are incrementally constructing. The last thing on this list is the simplest, and possibly the most powerful, and almost nobody actually does it in the form that works. Thing 9. They end every day with a deliberate accounting of what was enough. 33 minutes to 36 minutes. The happiest people you know, almost without exception, have some version of a practice that does one very specific thing. At the end of each day, it asks, what happened today that was genuinely good? Not what went according to plan, not what I achieved, not what I accomplished, what was genuinely good, what was, in itself, worth having happened. This sounds so simple that it's tempting to dismiss it. And yet the research on this specific practice is more consistent and more robust than almost any other single intervention in the psychology of well-being. The mechanism is not magical, it's attentional. The human brain processes and retains negative information more readily than positive information. This was adaptive in an ancestral environment where remembering threats was more survival relevant than remembering pleasant experiences. But in a modern environment where genuine physical threats are relatively rare, this bias runs continuously on the ordinary friction of daily life. The difficult conversation gets more mental airtime than the good one. The thing that went wrong gets rehearsed more than the thing that went right. The gap between expectation and outcome gets more attention than the things that were simply good and unremarkable. The deliberate evening accounting interrupts this bias. Not by forcing positivity, by deliberately redirecting attention to what was actually present and actually good, which the default settings of the mind were going to process lightly and then discard. Marcus Aurelius's entire private meditations reads like this practice extended over decades, not written for an audience, not for posterity, an act of daily calibration, of ending each day with intentional contact with his own experience of it. Here is the specific version I've seen work, not the generic, write 3 things you're grateful for, which becomes automatic and loses meaning within weeks, but 3 specific questions asked genuinely. What happened today that I'm glad happened? something specific, not abstract. Who showed up for me today, in any way? Someone who was kind, present, helpful, honest. Someone whose existence in the day was good. What did I do today that I'm glad I did? Something chosen, even something small, that reflects something you value. These three questions, answered specifically rather than generically, do something the positivity mindset approach almost never achieves. They don't tell you things are better than they are. They redirect your attention to what's actually there that's genuinely good, and that your default mental settings we're going to process lightly and then move past without registering. Over time, this changes not what happens, but what you notice is happening. And the experience of your own life is made ultimately not by what happens to you, by what you notice is happening. Conclusion: 9 things, and they have one thread running through all of them. They are all, in some form, acts of attention. Choosing what you compare yourself to, what you let into your mind, what you allow to remain finished, what you subtract rather than add, who you genuinely invest in, what difficulty you choose, what your worth is attached to, what direction you're pointed in, what you notice at the end of the day. All of it is attention. This is not a coincidence. The Stoics built their entire understanding of well-being around a single insight that holds across 2,000 years of philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. You are, at any moment, what you are attending to. Your experience of your life is not determined by what happens in it. It is determined by what you notice, what you amplify, what you dwell on, and what you let go. The happiest people you know have not found easier lives. They have found a better relationship with their own attention. And the 9 things I've walked you through today are not 9 separate practices. They are 9 different expressions of the same fundamental discipline. The discipline of choosing, deliberately, daily, imperfectly, what deserves the limited, irreplaceable resource of your awareness. Marcus Aurelius wrote something I keep returning to because it condenses something vast into very few words. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. He didn't mean positive thinking. He meant the actual texture of your daily experience, what it feels like to be you, moving through an ordinary Wednesday, is made of the thoughts you habitually think, the comparisons you run, the things you dwell on, the stories you tell yourself about what's happening and what it means. And those thoughts are, to a greater extent than the default experience of most people's lives suggests, subject to direction, not perfectly, not completely, not without constant practice, but more than you currently believe. You can attend differently, and if you do, not as a single insight, but as a daily return to the same discipline, with the same patience you'd give to anything worth building, the experience of your life will change. Not because your circumstances changed, because you changed what you're choosing to see within them.